Jesus had been preaching on the other side of the lake, and when he returned to Capernaum, a large crowd was there to meet him. One of them was a man named Jairus, who was a leader in the Jewish synagogue. He fell down at Jesus' feet and begged him to come home with him, for his only child was dying, a little girl 12 years old. Jesus went with him, pushing through the crowds. In the crowd was a sick woman who had been bleeding for 12 years, with no cure after spending all her money on doctors. She thought that if she could just touch Jesus' robe, she would be healed of her long-time infirmity. In the Bible, there are 24 stories of Jesus doing individual healings of people. But this one was unique.
A woman who had been ill for 12 years came behind him and touched the hem of his garment. This we may regard as a prayer, insofar as she came to him, saying within herself, "If I may but touch his garment, I shall be whole." But on the other hand, it was no true prayer, in as far as she expected to be healed without the knowledge and will of the healer. And although she came to him, she did not ask him to heal her. She thought with innocent theft to steal from him a cure.
The instant she touched the edge of his robe, the bleeding stopped, and the touch did in an instant what doctors couldn't do in a dozen years. "Who touched me?" Jesus asked. Everyone denied it, and Peter said, "Master, so many people are crowding against you." But Jesus told him, "No, it was someone who deliberately touched me, for I felt healing power go out from me."
And when the woman saw that she was not hid, she came trembling, and falling down before him, she declared unto him before all the people for what cause she had touched him, and how she was healed immediately. And he said unto her, "Daughter, be of good comfort. Thy faith hath made thee whole. Go in peace." While he yet spake, there cometh one from the ruler of the synagogue's house, saying to him, "Thy daughter is dead, trouble not the master." But when Jesus heard it, he answered him, saying, "Fear not, believe only, and she shall be made whole."
When they arrived at the house, Jesus wouldn't let anyone into the room except for the parents, Peter, and 2 other disciples, James and John, who were brothers, John later becoming the author of the 4th Gospel. The home was full of mourning people, but Jesus said, "Stop the weeping. She isn't dead, she is only asleep." This brought scoffing and laughter, for they all knew she was dead.
And he put them all out, and took her by the hand, and called, saying, "Maid, arise." And her spirit came again, and she arose straightway, and he commanded to give her meat. And her parents were astonished, but he charged them that they should tell no man what was done.
The bleeding woman and Jairus' daughter are 2 interwoven stories, a miracle within a miracle, pointing out that Jesus can cure sickness and death, adults and children, Gentiles and Jews, a poor woman and the daughter of an important man. King Herod, the ruler of Galilee, divorced his wife and married the wife of his half-brother. John the Baptist called him out for this sinful behavior, and Herod had him thrown in prison. On his birthday, Herod had a big party, and his stepdaughter performed a dance which pleased the drunken king so much that he promised to give her anything she wanted. Her mother told her to ask for the head of John the Baptist, and the king fulfilled her wish. According to the Gospel of Matthew, when Jesus heard the news, he went off by himself in a boat to a remote area to be alone. But the crowds saw where he was headed and followed by land from many villages. So when Jesus came out of the wilderness, a vast crowd was waiting for him, and he pitied them and healed their sick. That evening, the disciples came to him and said, "It is already past time for supper, and there is nothing to eat here." This set the stage for one of Jesus' most famous miracles, the only miracle reported by all four Gospels. "Send the crowds away so that they can go to the villages and buy food," the disciples said. But Jesus replied, "This isn't necessary. You feed them." "What?" they asked. "We have exactly 5 small loaves of bread and 2 fish." Jesus had the power to raise people from the dead. You'd think the disciples by now would have just given him the benefit of the doubt.
He said, "Bring them here to me." He commanded the multitudes to sit down on the grass, and he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he blessed, broke, and gave the loaves to the disciples, and the disciples gave to the multitudes. They all ate and were filled. They took up the 12 baskets full of that which remained left over from the broken pieces.
About 5,000 men were in the crowd that day, besides all the women and children, which means it could have been as much as 20,000. Immediately after this, Jesus told his disciples to get in their boat and cross to the other side of the lake while he stayed to get the people started home. Then Jesus went up into the hills to pray. Night fell, and out on the lake the disciples were in trouble, for the wind had risen and they were fighting heavy seas. About 4 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came to them, walking on the water. They screamed in terror, for they thought he was a ghost.
Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Cheer up, I am. Don't be afraid." Peter answered him and said, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the waters." He said, "Come." Peter stepped down from the boat and walked on the waters to come to Jesus.
But when he looked around at the high waves, he was terrified and began to sink. Do you blame him? Walking on water would be hard enough, even if the water was as smooth as glass. "Save me, Lord," he shouted. Instantly, Jesus reached out his hand and rescued him. "O man of little faith," Jesus said, "why did you doubt me?" And when they had climbed back into the boat, the wind stopped. What lesson was Peter supposed to learn? If you keep your eyes on the Lord, you'll be safe. If you put your eyes on your troubles, you'll sink. Peter has been criticized for centuries for his lack of faith. But in all fairness, as mentioned earlier, he was the only one who got out of the boat. According to the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus came to Caesarea Philippi, which was about 25 miles northeast of the Sea of Galilee. He asked his disciples, "Who are the people saying I am?" "Well," they replied, "some say John the Baptist, some Elijah, some Jeremiah or one of the other prophets." Then he asked them, "Who do you think I am?" Peter answered, "The Christ, the Messiah, the Son of the living God." "God has blessed you," Jesus said, "for my Father in heaven has personally revealed this to you. This is not from any human source. You are Peter, a stone, and upon this rock I shall build my church, and all the powers of hell shall not prevail against it. And I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever doors you lock on earth shall be locked in heaven, and whatever doors you open on earth shall be open in heaven." From then on, Jesus began to speak plainly to his disciples about going to Jerusalem and what would happen to him there, that he would suffer at the hands of the Jewish leaders, that he would be killed, and that 3 days later he would be raised to life again. But Peter took him aside and said, "Heaven forbid, sir, this is not going to happen to you." Peter's heart was in the right place, but when the Lord tells you something, it's better not to disagree. Jesus turned on Peter with an often quoted line, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a dangerous trap to me. You are thinking merely from a human point of view and not from God's." Then Jesus said to his disciples, "If anyone wants to be a follower of mine, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For anyone who keeps his life for himself shall lose it, and anyone who loses his life for me shall find it again. What profit is there if you gain the whole world and lose eternal life? What can be compared with the value of eternal life?" In the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus took Peter, James, and John with him into the hills to pray. As he was praying, his face began to shine, and his clothes became dazzling white and blazed with light.
The outer man shone with the delight of the inner man, for his Father was with him, so that even his garments shared in the glory. Such is what the presence of the Father will do for every man. May I not add that the shining of the garments is a type of the glorification of everything human when brought into its true relations by and with the present God.
Then 2 men appeared and began talking with him, Moses and Elijah. They were splendid in appearance, glorious to see, and they were speaking of his death in Jerusalem, to be carried out in accordance to God's plan. Moses represented the law, Elijah the prophets, and Jesus was the fulfillment of them both. Peter and the others had been very drowsy and had fallen asleep. They woke up and saw Jesus covered with brightness and glory, and the 2 men standing with him. As Moses and Elijah were starting to leave, Peter, all confused and not knowing what he was saying, blurted out, "Master, that is wonderful. We'll put up 3 shelters, one for you, and one for Moses, and one for Elijah." Nobody knows how Peter thought he could pull off such a thing, but his intentions, as always, were good. But even as he was saying this, a bright cloud formed above them, and terror gripped them as it covered them. And a voice from the cloud said, "This is my Son, my chosen one. Listen to him." Then, as the voice died away, Jesus was there alone with his disciples. They didn't tell anyone what they had seen until long afterwards.